Morning, Gamecock fans. JC Shurburtt here with you. Today is Tuesday, July 1st, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee. Welcome to the month of July, everyone. Glad we all made it here. Start of the fiscal year. We've talked about that a lot with the House settlement being fully implemented at this date around college athletics. I don't know that that's a reason to celebrate. Sort of feels anxious in a lot of ways if you read everything that's being reported about it, and we'll see what happens on that. I am looking forward to talking a lot more about football than the House settlement and all the changes in college sports. It's very political right now. There's a lot of competing narratives about it. I think anytime you try and involve the federal government with something, it gets very complicated because we live in a constitutional republic with the representative democracy, and the idea is for lots of different ideas to come to the table and you kind of make sausage with it. And with this one, it's there's a lot of like basic definitions that need to be hammered out, i.e., are they employees or not? That kind of thing. So I'm sick of it. I'll talk about it all day if you let me, but because I have some opinions, obviously. But that's going on today. We will see in 13 days what SEC Media Days in Atlanta brings us. Again, Inside the Gamecocks is on hiatus until Monday, July 14th, and that's the start of that event in Atlanta. It's always kind of the unofficial kickoff to college football. Sports Talk is still going strong on the Chief Sports app with Phil Kornblue. Check that out. Also had a good SEC Sunday night I told you about yesterday. So there's all the morning announcements. Yesterday, and this was a good thing and a bad thing, in my opinion. The outcome was obviously not what everyone around Gamecock land wanted. But Pierre Dean made a decision. I talked about him yesterday. I was like, I heard the same thing everybody else did, that Carolina made a late move. Lots of crystal ball predictions in for the Gamecocks, and then lo and behold, at 3:30, he picked Georgia, where his brother went. And so went back and forth. The good news about it was, and Josh Pate mentioned this too on one of his shows, that it felt this year like recruiting was back. As far as the month of June, fan base is getting excited. The talk about it, the transfer portal obviously has sucked a lot of energy out of the room. High school recruiting has kind of been put on the back burner. I believe that'll still be the case when it comes to signing day in December, as long as they keep having it then. There's just too much going on. And keep in mind, if you're listening to this podcast, you obviously love recruiting and keep up with it. But I will say you're a very smallish portion of the fan base at large. Now, with the transfer portal, the fan base at large gets a little bit more involved. And we see this with baseball, too. Like college baseball recruiting now has more eyes on it than ever because fans that college baseball in general, it's tough with the high school guys because part of them go pro. There's junior college guys, more JUCO heavy than the other sports now these days. And so you sort of, it never has been something super popular. Those of you that are members of the BigSpur.com follow it because John Whittle covered it for decades and done a great job. But when the portal started happening, baseball fans were able to connect, because you have stats with this guy. You may have seen him play. South Carolina got a pitcher from Sacred Heart that started in the opening series against them. Good stuff. Good stuff, by the way. If they can, he's kind of a project, but if they can hone that in, we'll see. So you know more about him, and it's human nature to be enthusiastic about something that you have more of a knowledge about. And so in football, the portal, man, you hear big names out there. You look and see what they were ranked in high school. You've seen them play in a lot of instances. It's like free agency in many ways, as far as pro fans getting excited about who you go get. Believe me, I'm a Chicago Bears guy, and they got a pretty good couple of offensive linemen through free agency this year, which is good news for Caleb Williams, which is what we talked about yesterday, protection on the offensive line. So the Pierre Dean situation yesterday, where he committed to Georgia late, the good news was it was an old fashioned back and forth. I can't remember one like that since maybe Nick Harbor. And if you're down in the dumps, I will remind you that, on the traditional signing day, when Nick signed, I mean, I woke up that morning to a text. He's going to Oregon. 2 hours later, he's going to South Carolina. And an hour later, he's going to Oregon. And so that thing went back and forth, and the Gamecocks came out on top. You don't see that often anymore. Most of the time, everybody knows where players are going. But like I said yesterday, it was much closer than people thought, and it was 50-50 the entire time. I think some of the predictions were just kind of trying to read the tea leaves, because I think South Carolina felt pretty confident, Georgia maybe not so much, but then Georgia got him at the end. And there are no points for second place when it comes to recruiting. But these days with the transfer portal, although I will say at Carolina specifically, Lavoisier Carroll, who unfortunately had to give up football, who went to UGA, played corner, was unhappy, and came to Carolina where he's originally committed. You don't always see the guy that like leave and go with his number two choice, but you also don't see recruitments that are this close. Dane Key comes to mind. Dane Key, he gets in the portal. He had a great relationship with Justin Stepp and the entire Gamecock staff, and Carolina really made him think. He stayed at home and went to Kentucky. He got in the portal, wasn't really interested in coming to South Carolina, wanted to go. It ended up at Nebraska, not even Georgia, where, Georgia was where his sister went. I mean, and Dane Key, I think Georgia would have taken him. I think there was some financial considerations, which, as we all get older, money starts to become a factor. Now he's still a college student, but I get that. I totally get that. Plus, you got an offensive coordinator now, Dana Holgerson, that's going to get you the ball, and Dylan Raiola out there. So that was it's probably part of it as well. There are still football decisions that are made, and so that's so there's a school of thought, keep the relationship good. And if you finish second, that's not bad. I don't know that we've been far enough into it to say definitively that, okay, so you can get guys back. You can get players through the transfer portal if you lose one. But it may not be the same player. Maybe in many cases you get somebody better. So Dean picks Georgia. I think as a player, first of all, it was Georgia's idea to move into defense. So it was going to be tough because if you're going to remarket yourself as on the other side of the ball, and it was certain school's idea, then chances are, you're going to like to go to that school. I think in their system, the 3-4, they have D tackles, D ends on the inside when they run the three, and they run a lot of 3-man front. It's essentially Nick Saban's defense, and with a little Will Muschamp and a little Kirby Smart, and then Glenn Schumann, their very fine defensive coordinator at University of Georgia. But I think with his size now, because he's around 260, he can probably see a path to playing a 3-4 end there, early. And people, and that's kind of the football end of it. Plus his brother played there. His parents are familiar with everybody. I mean, that's just kind of it. Nothing that South Carolina did wrong. It's just at the end of the day, there's a lot that goes into these decisions. One thing I will say is I would be very shocked if Georgia just came back with a bunch of money. That's a miss. That's something people don't really get. They associate the big spending schools and NIL with success. That's not always the case. That's not to say that successful programs haven't spent big. Texas, Ohio State, Southern Cal hadn't been that successful, but they've spent. A&M hadn't been that successful, but they've spent. Oregon obviously is one of those that's had success and spins. But your Georgias and Alabamas of the world, and teams like that, Michigan. Now Michigan may be spending a little more than we thought with some of their boosters. But then look at Texas Tech. I mean, they're one of the biggest spenders there is across the board, and they're using this to their advantage. That's an example of a program that's not historically great across the board. They've had their moments, but they seem to be committed to everything, including softball, where they paid a pitcher $1 million. LSU spends about like South Carolina does. And that I think is healthy, because to each his own. You're battling Georgia, you're battling LSU, you're battling Alabama for players, in the portal and also through the high school ranks, and you can kind of decide who to prioritize, and they can decide who to prioritize, and you get your share. But I don't think this decision came down to that. I think family, maybe a path to earlier playing time, given the scheme fit. Personally, I think he would have played at Carolina next year. I don't think being 200, and Carolina does run some 3-man front, but he made that decision. So there's a big picture part of, so there's a specific part of that and a general part of that decision. Specifically, generally Carolina, was right there at the end with a highly rated player, and had to overcome family connections and comfort level, which is what all recruiting decisions are based on, comfort level. And you're going to be comfortable where your brother had a good experience, obviously, and was right there at the end and made him think, and they almost got him. That shows that South Carolina can go head to head with just about anybody. And it's an out-of-state guy too. If it was an in-state guy, that's a little different, though Georgia will cross the border and they will get players out of South Carolina. It will happen. You want to limit it, but it's always happens. It's too close. Athens is right there to a lot of points in the South, so it's too close to really say, it's unrealistic is what I'm saying, that they won't come into the state. What you want to avoid is others, the old school teams, Tennessee mainly. And you're because you're going to lose some to Clemson too. That's why the in-state talent base expanding helps the Gamecocks, because if you have 8 and you lose 3, that's only 5 that impacts your roster. If you have 20 in your state, and they're not quite at 20 yet, and you sign 16, and one goes, you lose a few here and there, that's still 16 good players, in theory, that you get. But so big picture wise, the general is, they just lost a recruiting battle. And, you look at who Carolina's recruiting against right now with just about everybody. And that's it's going to happen, just like Carter Meadows. Carolina gave it all they got. He opted for Michigan. You do your best and you go from there. It's not really about when you recruit this way, who you lose. It's can you get, is how much of a hole is that going to put in your roster if you lose a guy? And go sign somebody else that's good, or hit the portal. There's a lot of options. It's not as devastating to lose a guy anymore. The specific of it though stinks, because dadgummit, that was like, it felt yesterday when he committed to Georgia, and just from a fan perspective, that they had blown a 2-touchdown lead just because of all the information out there that it looked like Carolina on a national level. Now, locally, Hale McGranahan reports early in the morning yesterday it's 50-50. I always felt it was 50-50. I felt it could go either way. I was never all that confident, but I thought they had a realistic chance at getting him. But that's what happened, and they didn't. It felt bad. The other part of that is, I know all of you that follow recruiting, and again, if you listen to this podcast, you do. You're sick of losing defensive tackles to Georgia. And the question sometimes becomes, how many are they going to take? Especially, with the 3-man front that they run. You're like, well, how many can they possibly play? I think this is a smart strategy. I see Texas doing it too. Texas got 5 defensive tackles out of the portal this year. And that's such an important position, as we all know, from talking about South Carolina's roster. You need to be good in the middle, and you also need to have depth. And just like everybody will tell you, fourth quarter, if you've been rolling your defensive lineman and you're good up front, offensive line doesn't substitute a whole lot, and they get tired. And with the way you have to block and kind of contort your body, you get worn down. And then does expend a lot of energy on the defensive line because you're rushing the passer. That expends more energy than just about anything in football. So it's very beneficial to have guys that can steal snaps. Now, Brad Lawing, the late great Brad Lawing, when he was here under Spurrier, he didn't have a lot of depth. He had depth that he developed and guys that could kind of steal snaps. Aldrick Fordham's one of those. Chaz Sutton early in his career was one of those. Even the younger Dixon, before he had to go start, or the younger Dixon, the South Point Dixon that was the end. His brother from Northwestern was an interior guy. Gerald Dixon, stole some snaps. And that helped, and Brad Lawing was really good at it. I think Travian's good at that too. I think he learned well. But Travian still, coming into the season, has much more depth, than they did back in the day on the interior. And then at end, you had elite edge rushers, at Carolina at that point in time. So I understand, and Will Muschamp, who is now at Georgia. Sorry about that. He was at Florida. He mentioned that when he was at South Carolina. And, say what you want about Muschamp. He can talk ball with the best of them. He's got a great, football mind as far as explaining things and things of that nature. I'm not talking about his head coaching record or winning and losing or anything like that. That's the bottom line. But, he mentioned several times in press conferences when big guys on defense get gassed, they're gassed, and it's hard to get them back. And so, that kind of gives you a window into the philosophy that you want to take as many good ones as possible. Now, Georgia will lose some through the portal. Schools that kind of recruit at Georgia's level tend to take portal losses because if you got a lot of highly recruited guys and they're not playing, they're not necessarily going to buy into the 3-year plan. They're going to try to go play and make money elsewhere because all those guys think they're going to the NFL. They're not, but they think that because of the rating and a bunch of offers and having their butt kissed and all that good stuff. I'm not saying that's PJ Dean, that's, I'm talking, just philosophy here. So specifically it sucked, specifically it felt like they lost a game, which is kind of how it is for diehard fans like yourselves here in July, because there are no games being played. And you lost one to Georgia again from North Carolina, which North and South Carolina, their expectation is that South Carolina can, I know they've struggled in North Carolina. We've taught that blue in the face, but I think better days are ahead. But, from South Carolina North, you want to be able to get to a point where you can beat Georgia head to head on a player. Now, look, this guy's brother went to Georgia. It's not like willy-nilly Georgia swooped in and got a guy that should be, that kind of thing. It was going to be an upset if Carolina got him. But at some point, I think the last North Carolina player that on the D line that Carolina beat Georgia for was Rick Sandage back in the day. And so, yeah, you need to, at some point beat the dogs on a recruit. And I think, look, here's the thing too. It takes time for this stuff. That's why they always say it takes time in college football to build, because recruiting, sometimes takes time to establish that rep, and, it moves at a glacial pace through the years as far as being able to get players. I think we'll all go back and, a couple of years down the road, few years down the road, and say, remember that time Georgia signed every defensive tackle they went head to head against Carolina for? And we'll chuckle. These things don't last forever, but And I don't think it really matters when you're talking about evaluating a recruiting class or whatever. It matters to fans, and it matters as far as Georgia recruits damn good football players, and you want them. But it just so happens that the Dogs kind of own the Gamecocks when it comes to D tackle specifically at a certain position. It's been weird, or unique, not weird. I don't think this is any surprise. So that's what happened with PJ Dean. Um, I saw something. Gosh, I saw two things. I saw somebody complaining about it, and then I saw a prompt on YouTube. Uh, they have the AI. It's not quite there. Suggested make these videos, right? Because I guess it's, I guess geared towards YouTubers. And it said, is the number 59 recruiting class acceptable? Yeah, I'm like, well, that's a good topic, but probably needs to be kind of explained. And so I'm going to look at this. South Carolina is 59th in the 24/7 sports team recruiting rankings. And I was like, I've been looking at it because, Carolina's got 8 pretty good commits, a lot of blue chip prospects. And this is per 24/7 sports composite, which is what the team, I was like, did they mess with the algorithm? And no, they may want to consider that. And I think there are some good changes coming with the 24/7 sports rankings. And I know I say this knowing On3 has South Carolina's class significantly better. And all I can say to that is they use a different algorithm, which is funny because the same people, I guess, led the process with algorithms at both places. But that's okay. I mean, because if you have a chance to improve your product, you always want to. So Carolina's 59th right now, 24/7 sports. And so I even got a text from a coach at another school. They used to be at Carolina. Why is Carolina 59th or 40th in one? And they were 40th at the time, and then 14th in another. I don't know. Different algorithm, right? Different emphasis on things. So, I think that the team ranking is the team ranking. I always say don't overthink it. Don't look at it as far as, like Phil Steele picked the Gamecocks 10th in the SEC. If Carolina finishes 10th in the SEC in recruiting, you can't look at it like we just went 7-5, because there's a very minuscule difference numerically that separates the classes, and everybody in the SEC recruits well. That's the idea. I mean, and it doesn't guarantee if you recruit well that you're going to win. What you want to do, though, is make sure you don't recruit poorly and get a bunch of, knuckleheads, or get a bunch of guys that can't play dead in a movie that were overrated, because that causes you to lose. You will finish very low in the SEC. So don't get too caught up in it, but it's still nice to see your team ranked there, and you can use that to recruit further. Shane Beamer's classes have finished pretty strongly. Some of like the best class, 2024, I think was 22nd, just high school guys, because it didn't have a lot of players in it. And the justification there is, well, if a class is going to, how much can 15 players make an impact? Blah blah blah. That's a philosophy we sort of developed at Rivals back in the day. 24/7's algorithm is designed to not place as much emphasis on number of recruits, but places heavy emphasis on quality at the top. So you look at the average 24/7 sports composite rating. Gamecocks are sitting at 91.25. All right, so that's quality. Okay, that's good for 8th in the country. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that will hold. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's the end all. I think some people got it twisted one year. I was like, well, the average star rating is high, and then I think it was under Muschamp or Beamer one, and they had summer camp and a lot of 3 stars committed, and it drug that down. And so everybody's like, oh, see, told you that's not what we need to focus on. But think about it like this. It's like right now, I think that's good to look at, because it's not like you're, as far as quality goes, and adding blue chip prospects and all that, It's eighth in the country, which means a lot of the other schools, are looking at the situation and, or sorry, are ahead as far as number of commits. So check this out. Southern Cal's number one in the country. They have 30 commitments. Georgia, which I like every one of their 26 commits, but they got 26 of them. Notre Dame has 22, Texas A&M 21, Ohio State 19, Clemson 20, Alabama only 15. They're eighth. I'd probably take Alabama's class over Southern Cal's. Michigan, I'd also take their class over a lot of other ones too. 18th. Penn State, I definitely would take their class over some. 23. So every single one, Carolina has 8. So with the exception of Alabama, every single one of these classes has double the number of players. So I was like, well, JC, these days I'm always like putting the BS meter on myself. And by the way, we have some good stuff coming up on the show and on thebigspur.com about that. I think I'm at the point in my career where I'd like to have more discussions about being wrong about things because it helps. I think I'm all right more than I'm wrong, but I am wrong, and sharpens the knife a little bit. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, so on thebigspur.com, and it's a free product. Those of you that aren't members, by the way, discount, use code TheShow50 if you want a half off an annual membership. But you don't have to be a member. You can go right over there, click on football recruiting tab, go down to class calculator, and it helps you get a score based on who you may get. And so I played around with it today and put in Smoke Matthews, Darius Gray, Tamarian Watkins. Who else, JC? Who else you put in? Oh, Noah Clark, who's deciding soon. And Landon Duckworth. Don't forget him. So those 5 guys. And the score it spit back to me was 252 point something, which would put Carolina as the ninth ranked class in America with only 14 commits. I'll say it again. You get those 5 guys, and it looks different levels of good for all of them. And you've got 14 commits. I just went through everybody else. The only one that's even Michigan with 18, Alabama 15, Miami 19, Ohio State 19. So you're kind of in that range, but still lower than everybody else. You're ninth in the country. Now, between now and the time all 5 of these guys decide, a lot of other decisions will be made. It'll go up, it'll go down. Guys will be re-ranked and all that. But that's just to tell you that, like, right now, the number 59 ranking is really a function of the algorithm and the number of commits they have. Because you get these 5 and you can go on the site and play around with it and see, what about 4? What about 3? Please be my guest. Like I said, you don't even have to be a member. Tweet about it. That's fine with me too. But if you get these 5, you have a 14-man class that's a top 10 class in the country by the rankings. Again, I'm not going to be hypocritical here. What does that mean? Just means it's a good class. I mean, it's better to see your team ranked higher than not, but are they ordering national championship rings? No, if that happens. And the idea in recruiting, and I wish we had something to gauge recruiting through the years, like a trend. There used to be in Athlon, they would have 5-year record graphics. When you get the magazine, you say 5, 6, 9, and they go up and down. I wish there was a trend line over time, because that's what really matters. You can have one good class, and then a couple of stinkers, and that's it. And you don't really know. Right now, I know that most of those guys in the 2024 class are good. Will they all be really good? I don't know. Wendell Gregory and Cam Pringle have already left out of that class. I hope nobody else does, because I like just about every one of them. When you have Dylan Stewart and Michael Smith, and you kind of look on, you got DeJulius Solomon is in that class. Josiah Thompson is in that class. I mean, it's a good class. A lot of highly rated guys that are just Mazio Bennett just now getting started with their career, but it was small in numbers. 2025 was larger. This class probably will end up not as large. And at the end of the day, and they'll have to hit the portal for some positions as well. I say have to hit the portal. They will hit the portal. We got to get out of the mindset that, recruiting the portal is in some ways like, oh, you failed on the high school level. And I think it's pretty obvious South Carolina is being a lot more selective high school wise, out of state especially. They're bringing in guys they have a realistic shot at getting that are good. And they're not just bringing in guys, which is good. Darren Usher deserves a lot of credit for that, because I think that's a sound philosophy, given the way the program recruits the portal and kind of their method. I think we're seeing that develop. And frankly, every day that goes by, I think more and more about Virginia Tech under Frank Beamer, and a lot of things kind of are starting to add up. The difference would be South Carolina is, handling roster management the way Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech did, but more scale to compete in the SEC than the Big East or ACC. And what I mean by that, there's a lot more quality players, talent, that kind of thing, known talent, in addition to being able to go find the guys and develop them. I think that's a nice blend. I also think the development part of it is applicable across the board to everybody, and that gets lost. It's not plug and play 5-star every single time. In fact, it's a low percentage as far as immediate impact 5 stars. Now, do you want Nick Harbor to make an impact this year? Absolutely. It feels like time for him. So anyway, if you are worried, and I haven't seen, a lot, I saw like more outrage on signing day a few years ago, because Carolina, I think, was a top 25 class, but finished 14th, 13th in the SEC. I saw more outrage and concern about that than I do the current class ranking, because I think a lot of people know there's a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak. And these 5 guys that I mentioned, I feel, like I said, various levels of good about all of them. And they all, except maybe Gray, will commit in the coming days, or coming weeks, probably during our break, during that. So I'll be right here with you. One thing I did not do on Dean yesterday, I was going to, if he did commit to the Gamecocks, going to have a special video here to break it all down. Glad I didn't pre-record that, right? Thought about it. I was like, nah, I'm not feeling it right now. So anyway, hope you all have a wonderful 4th of July week. The wife and I have started kind of deciding on what to make. The kids requested low country boil. I've had low country boil on the 4th of July before. It's pretty, friends of ours in Tennessee did it one time. So we're kind of scrambling, looking for sales on crab legs and things like that. Wife loves crab legs. So looking forward to that on Friday. It's probably no show Friday. Just going to kind of get up and do the 4th with the family. But probably, most likely, we'll be back, for the rest of the week. God willing, and the creek don't rise, right? So anyway, folks, have a fantastic Tuesday. The worst, I'm still going to say it's the worst day of the week, but this one feels a little nice. And stay tuned to this channel, Chief Sports South Carolina. Please like, subscribe, and share if you're listening on podcast. Please go rate the Inside the Gamecocks podcast offerings 5 stars. Don't write a nasty review, because I will find you. And no, I'm just kidding. Anyway, folks, I'm out. I think I have to get on 107.5 today. Not quite sure. But maybe we'll have a conversation with Wild Bill Gunner in the next 4 minutes. So holla at you soon.